Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have another amazing guest to introduce to you now. Dr. Sarah Zaldivar has a PhD in exercise physiology and nutrition from the University of Miami. She had previously completed her bachelor's and master's degrees in nutrition and dietetics, in addition to a hospital internship, before passing the board examination to become a licensed dietitian. After 9 years in Miami, she recently relocated to Ocala, Florida, where she continues to teach nutrition classes online at Miami-Dade College. She is a certified personal trainer and a certified exercise physiologist with the American College of Sports Medicine, for whom she taught workshops focused on training students to sit for the ACSM's personal training certification. She is currently fully focused on content creation as a YouTuber, helping others find optimal health through a carnivore diet, mindset shifts, exercise, and dance. An equally important component of her work focuses on anti-aging and framing the aging process as a chronic disease that we can eventually reverse and cure. Dr. Zaldivar, what an absolute honor it is to welcome you to Boundless Body Radio.
Hi, thank you so much, Casey. I'm so excited.
Yeah, so excited to have you here. I first heard you on the Carnivore Yogi podcast with our great mutual friend, Sarah Kleiner. Absolutely love her work. And it was about 20 minutes into the conversation, you guys were talking about plant anti-nutrients. And you have listed all of the usual suspects like lectins and phytic acid and oxalates and all these things. And you mentioned one that I had never heard of before. I wasn't confident that I could spell it or even say it correctly or look it up. Aquaporins, I think is what it was.
Aquaporins.
Aquaporins. I've never heard of this before. So I messaged Sarah immediately on Instagram. I'm like, yo, Sarah, great episode with Dr. Zaldivar. But what the hell is she talking? What are aquaporins? She's like, I have no idea either. Well, we got to get her back on. We got to talk about this.
Yeah, awesome. So I didn't even know what aquaporins were. And granted, I was already decades into the fitness industry. And I had no idea what aquaporins were up until I started reading up on anti-nutrients from Dr. Stephen Gundry's book. And from there, experimenting with a carnivore diet and understanding the whole notion of plant self-defense mechanisms. And I knew some of them, but I still, by the way, to this day, I still learn new things. Like, for example, avocados have persin in them. This isn't something that we hear about. A lot of people will say avocados are completely harmless. Well, no, they do have a defense. It's called persin. Fruits have salicylates in them, So the reason I discovered or stumbled upon the literature on aquaporins is because my husband used to struggle with severe low back pain, very sore low back pain. Could not be sitting for too long, could not be sleeping enough. You couldn't get enough hours of sleep because he couldn't be horizontal for too long. It would just hurt so much eventually. It was really affecting his quality of life, and he really did not want to go through the surgery because of the risks associated with that. And eventually it got to the point where there was just no other option. It's like he already ate perfectly, He competes in bodybuilding competitions. He maintains abs year round. All he eats is mainly meat and eggs. Wow. So the only thing that he would eat, well, before I dive into that, the reason I'm talking about how he's competing is because we never thought it was his diet, because he's eating super healthy. He's working out. He's doing everything you're supposed to do, right? So it never occurred to us it could be diet related. And back in the 90s, he had to move a tree away from his house that had fallen after Hurricane Andrew hit Miami. And so from that, he injured his back and he's got a bulging disc since then. And so he's seen all the doctors, all the specialists at the University of Miami and the Jackson Memorial Hospital in Miami. And they're all agreeing that it's just a mechanical thing, that's why you have the pain. Well, eventually, as I dove into the research and I started realizing that plant foods and vegetables might probably one of the worst things you can put in your body, I suggested that he cut out the spinach because that was the only thing in terms of veggies that he would consume. A bed of spinach. And on top of that, he would have grilled chicken or ground turkey that's cooked, just dump it on top without any salad dressing, nothing, just a bed of spinach.
Spinach, just spinach.
Just spinach. That's it. So I was like, you know what? I wonder, maybe if you take that out, just try and see what happens. So actually, he didn't like go out and decide, okay, I'm gonna cut it out. He just ran out, and I guess because I've been talking about that topic, he just didn't buy more spinach. And we didn't even realize that the back pain went away, because it would come and go. Like, it wasn't like 24/7, otherwise it would be horrendous. It would come and go, especially like on the weekends. If we're driving to Orlando for our drive, he would struggle with that because it's a long drive and he's sitting for too long. So it didn't even occur to us that it went away. And it was like gone for months, until one time we're coming back from the beach. We stopped by Publix, which is a local grocery store here in Florida, and got a bag of spinach just to change it up, just to have, you know, something, because it still had not clicked just how crucial that was. Literally right after he reintroduced the spinach, the low back pain came back with a vengeance. And so that's when it was like, okay, now we know. And that's how we discovered that his low back pain had nothing to do with the bulging disc. Maybe the bulging disc set up the environment, but it was the inflammation from the food that was triggering those nerves and triggering that pain. I mean, it's just mind-blowing stuff. And I was like, okay, great. Like, we were so happy we had figured it out. No more surgery. He can sleep better, longer. He can watch a marathon of movies if he wants to. It's not a problem anymore, because he can be sitting for long periods of time now. We can go on long road trips, no problem. I mean, so happy. Then we go to North Carolina. Our in-laws live there, and we never have like carbs and corn and stuff. So over there for Thanksgiving, they made corn pudding, and that's his mom's corn pudding, which is delicious. So obviously he had some. The low back pain came back, and I'm like, I wonder what happened. Like, what did you eat during that period of time that could have triggered it? Because other than that, he ate the normal diet that he eats. And I'm like, I wonder, corn. So, and then I dove into the research to see what is the thing in common between spinach and corn. Turns out it's something called aquaporins. And this is one of the ways that those plant foods defend themselves. And by the way, they're also found in soy. So it's in soy, spinach, and corn. Turns out that kind of chemical resembles pores, water channels that we have, or you can call them pores. They're really called water channels that we have on our cells, human cells, to regulate how much water should be inside versus outside the cell. So the aquaporins in humans, the normal ones that are found in the water channels that are found in our bodies, were only very recently discovered, right? And before that, they thought that it was by simple diffusion that water went in and outside of our cells. And then they realized sometimes, like if you are crying, there's a lot more water that needs to come out of cells. So there's got to be an additional mechanism that's happening that's allowing this water efflux to come out of the cell, and that's how they discovered those water channels. So the aquaporins in those plant foods resemble in structure those water channels, and that's a common theme we find in the way that plants defend themselves. They try to create chemicals that are very similar to proteins and chemicals that we have in our own bodies, because if it looks very similar to our bodies, it can interfere with the normal physiology of that normal structure. And so I don't know exactly further, like how exactly the aquaporins from those plant foods mess up with our own water channels. I don't know if somebody has bothered to study it. I haven't found any study on that. And I think that's because we don't really yet have an appreciation of the damage that plant toxins can have in human nutrition, because every major health organization literally is recommending the complete opposite of what humans should be eating, right? They're all recommending more fruits, more vegetables, more plants. So this is why we have such a dearth and a lack of science and studies that actually delve deeper in those. So yeah, that's how I came across aquaporins.
So amazing.
Yeah.
That is so interesting. I love that story. plants are really, really smart. We do not give nearly enough credit to plants for everything that they have evolved with. They have intelligence that I don't think can possibly comprehend. And
No.
I do want to talk about more of those plant toxins with you because you're such an expert in them and you discovered all these other things that even I didn't know about. But I have to we need to go back and tell your story. And for the listener who's maybe listening to this for the first time, you might be thinking we're absolutely nuts, or maybe we just really like steak, and so we decided to create this like alternate idea about nutrition. And I don't think people realize, like, you have been in this world for a very long time. You were taught a certain way. I have been doing personal training and nutrition coaching for over 15 years. I have been taught a certain way. It's always this way. You push this way out to people. Here's the meal plans. Here's the shopping list. Here's all the meals and snacks and whole grains and vegetables and all this stuff. And it's year after year after year of this doesn't work. My people aren't losing weight. They don't feel good. They have autoimmune issues. I'm hungry all the time. I can't even go between clients without a snack. Like people that are in the carnivore space didn't just stumble upon this one day and thought this was a great thing to do. We had to fight a lot of an uphill battle. And I'd love for you to share your story and how you became interested in nutrition and what kind of battle you had to fight against.
Yeah, well, first I would love to hear your end of the story. So I'm going to invite you over to my YouTube channel because I need to learn more about that. I'm a very curious person. And I know that our audience is going to love hearing about also how you came across everything we're talking about and finally realize that that's a better way. But yeah, I was also brainwashed that this is the way, what the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics recommends is the one true diet. And part of our homework would be, when I was going through dietitian school, was to literally research every other diet on the planet, like any books that were written. And then the homework would be why it's a fad diet. Every diet other than what the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics deems to be the right one, everything else is labeled a fad diet, including the one optimal human diet, which is the carnivore diet, which is what made us human, which is the diet that we ate for 99.99% of our existence. But no, according to the Academy, that's a fad diet. Our ancestors survived millions of years eating a fad diet.
Ridiculous.
So that now those dietitians that are heading the Academy can, breathe and be alive because of our ancestors, but no, they were wrong, But anyway, it is mind-blowing to me. So I was brainwashed with that and I believed it and I tried to put it into practice, but you always blame yourself. You always think, I'm not doing it right. I need more discipline. I need to like push through, even if I'm not feeling good, even if I have brain fog, even if I have aches and pains and soreness, it's because I'm training too hard, even though it's not that hard. It's like the normal amount. You should be able to recover quicker, right? Now I know that on a carnivore diet, there's almost no soreness, no pain, no aches and pain. So for people like you and I, it's actually very difficult, even probably harder. Actually, I don't know your full story, but I'm just assuming that you probably went through like what I went through. Is like, it's very difficult to wrap your head around the carnivore diet when you have been brainwashed in a completely different school of thought. So it took me far longer to finally understand that I've been duped and for it to click in my head. And the only reason that I finally understood that I've been wrong, what I've been taught was wrong, is because I was constantly putting it into practice, constantly failing, and then constantly trying again and trying again and trying again. I never gave up. And so every time I tried, I was trying to do it from a different angle, trying to read more books, watch more podcasts. So it was just this persistence in me that eventually I came to a point where I have all this knowledge now that I wasn't taught. Literally 99% of what I know, it wasn't stuff that I was taught in school. And so eventually got to a point, I was like, okay, I know they've showed me all the studies about fruits and veggies and they focus so much on that. I know that those things exist, but they completely forgot to tell me about the far bigger body of science that is completely at odds with what the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, unfortunately, still brainwashing their dietitians. It is almost criminal at this point what they're doing, the way that they have this lobbying and this influence that they have on the dietitians, and they have the nerve to try and regulate and license the practice of dietitians. It wasn't until Ron DeSantis, like a year ago, 2 years ago, finally passed a law that allowed everybody to give nutrition advice. Before that, you had to be a registered dietitian, literally making people sick, following, you know, what the academy is recommending: eat the grains, eat the 3 cups of milk a day, like
Wow.
bread and dairy. That's criminal.
Yeah,
That's
agreed.
insane. You know, and so finally Ron DeSantis passed that law 2 years ago to allow trainers and people, you know, any person should be able under the First Amendment to transfer knowledge from them to another person. It shouldn't be only registered dietitians, because trust me, they are the last person, for the most part. Obviously you can't generalize, but in general, when they're fresh out of the program, they're the last person that are ever going to get you to your goals.
Yeah. Totally agree. In fact, I've got this great book that just came out by Jane Buxton called The Great Plant-Based Con.
And
this goes, this is 500 pages. Like, this is not a small book, and she actually still eats plants, but this goes into detail not only on the nutritional side of things.
She still eats plants?
She does still eat some plants. It's similar in that way, and we're going to have her on, so it'd be great to ask her about that in particular. The idea of the book is like the plant-based narrative itself is not going to fix you, and it's not going to fix the planet the way it's pushed, but it goes in detail how the Seventh-day Adventists kind of took over nutrition and dietetics, and how they still to this day control all these schools and major organizations. And a lot of what we recommend to people as nutritionists and dietitian comes from the Garden of Eden diet from the Seventh-day Adventists. And if you knew how much power they had, you'd lose your mind. It's crazy.
Yeah. Yes. Dive into the research. Try to figure out like the names of those people who started the whole Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, this whole movement of eating more plants, and this whole idea that plants are healthy for you. It is all rooted in religious motivations, and mainly also the fact that masturbation and libido, best marker for health, is a sin. And so the idea was that if we can squash libido and have people not have any urges and not masturbate, then they'll go to heaven. That's the whole, this is where plant-based ideology starts from. And scientists, a lot of scientists follow just what people have already decided was healthy, like what the general perception is. Like, okay, veggies are healthy, so now I'm becoming a scientist. Let me design a study. What's the hypothesis? It's going to start with what my bias already is. It's wrong. That shouldn't be how science is conducted, but that's how it is the vast majority of the time. You're already starting out. It's like you're already climbing the wrong mountain. That's 99% of nutrition science.
It's crazy. Yeah, it's crazy.
They don't bother to hypothesize carnivore diet. Let's see how that goes. You know, why isn't anybody bothering to do that study?
That's right. That's right. And there's so much that people don't see when they read the headline that says, you know, plant-based is the very best thing for you or whatever. You don't realize how these studies are conducted. And yeah, you can do a randomized controlled trial, and some have been done in nutrition. They're notoriously very difficult to do. Oftentimes the results are ignored. The ones in the 70s, the Minnesota coronary trial, the Sydney heart health trial. But most of the ones that are done today are epidemiological. You give somebody a questionnaire to fill out. How many times in the last year have you eaten an apple? And they don't distinguish. Like, it could be a whole apple, or they even say on there, it may be like a half a cup of apples from the store. Like, first of all, those aren't the same thing. Second of all, what do you mean? How big is the apple? There's a fantastic, we'll link to this. There's a fantastic video out there that they're coaching somebody through. It's a farce, the whole thing, but they're coaching somebody through how to fill out a food frequency questionnaire. And one of the last things they come to is like, how many ribs do you typically eat? And he holds up some ribs and he counts on his hand like 6 ribs. He's like, no, in cups. How many cups of ribs do you consume? And he's like, what the hell?
Yes.
That's what they are. That's what they are.
I've used that when I was doing my master's research. It wasn't, we didn't call it dissertation, it was a thesis to finish my master's. I had to use a food frequency questionnaire. It's literally, it took me an hour with every subject, a whole hour to fill out the whole 12 months food frequency questionnaire. I mean, it's asking for the past 12 months. And by the end of it, they are about to kill you. They just want to be done with that questionnaire. You know, they just want to be through. And it's relying on their memory. I mean, most people will not remember what they ate yesterday, let alone for the past 12 months. Not only that, it is inherently flawed. The whole food frequency questionnaire completely does not care about asking about the burger bun, for example, the fries and the sodas. They'll ask you about the burger, and then the follow-up questions about how often you eat a burger are, is it lean beef or not? Because they're so worried about the fat content and the saturated fat in beef. But they don't bother to ask about what really constitutes the bulk of that burger, which is the carbohydrate component. Why aren't we asking about the burger bun, the French fries, the sodas, the salad dressings that you add on top of it, and the sugary dressings? That's over 60–70% of the calories you're getting in that burger. They don't even ask about that. You know, they ask about a burger, they ask about a pepperoni pizza to see if you're a meat eater. Well, how about the actual pizza? You know, like that's what they're looking at when they're looking at meat eaters versus non-meat eaters. They're looking at people who are eating the burgers and the pizzas, and they're labeling those as meat eaters. And then they're looking at the people who tend to believe the nutrition recommendations and try to work out and not smoke, and they live already a healthy lifestyle. And because they're following what they're being told, they're not eating the red meat because they think that red meat is bad. But they have all these other healthy, you know, lifestyle habits, and those are labeled the non-meat eaters. And that's 90%, if not more, of nutrition studies out there. Nutrition is not a science as it stands right now. It is wishful thinking to say that we have nutrition science at all.
Yeah, totally agree. If people learned where we get our recommendations from, how they started, it wasn't like a group of the best scientists and nutritionists that really studied this for a lot of years and came together in a cooperative fashion to, you know, really be the best of humanity and tell us exactly what to do. That's absolutely not how any of this unfolded.
No. And I get it. I get why this is happening. It's very hard to do a nutrition study. There are so many variables. The ultimate nutrition study, who nobody can, or very few can argue with the results, would be getting a pair of twins, multiple ones, so that you have a large enough sample size from birth, ideally even before birth, to control for the conditions before you enter the world. You would put them in a lab. You would control for the kind of light they're getting, the amount of light they're getting. You would control for every single other thing, like how much activity they're getting, what hobbies they're doing, socialization. You control for all those things. And then you give them the different diets that you want to choose from, that you want to study, and then you follow them up until they die. To see, because heart disease doesn't happen when you're in your 20s, right? That would be the optimal nutrition study. Clearly, that is never going to happen. Even if there is a willingness to do that, no ethical review board would sign off on that, because
that's right.
You know, you can't bring children and enroll them into that. So the best thing we can do is do a randomized control trial, but at least for 6 months, ideally you would need like 2 years. And still with that, that's short-term results. This is why I go back to evolution. It is the optimal study of plant-based versus animal-based. Just go back to our ancestors and see that our ancestors that branched off and started going in a vegan direction, they went extinct, versus the ancestors that gave birth to us, our lineage, they went in a carnivore direction and they became stronger. And that's who we come from. The vegan, that we already did that vegan experiment, they went extinct.
That's right. So. That's right. This is where the value comes in when we're talking to people who are into, you know, paleoarchaeology, people like Dr. Bill Schindler, Dr. Mickey Bindor, people we've interviewed in the past who have studied evolution, and they know that man was a fat hunter. We needed fat. We needed animals. Plants don't grow 365 days out of the year. They're not giving you food all the time. And the food they give you is vastly different than what most people would recognize in a grocery store today. It's totally, totally different. And without that evolutionary context, it would be very difficult to kind of parse those things out, but you're absolutely right. I do want to go back to some of those, the anti-nutrients that you find in plants. This is where I think it gets to be a little bit weird, and people get to, you know, they start thinking like, wow, spinach may not be the very best thing for me. My kale smoothie in the morning might not be the best thing for me. Can you explain a little bit why plants have so many chemicals that fight back? And can maybe we can get into some of those other plant toxins that can cause a lot of damage?
Yeah, not only is the spinach smoothie not the best thing you could do, it's probably the worst thing you're doing to yourself right now. Exactly. Any aches and pains and headaches and eczema, psoriasis, inflammation, all kinds of weird symptoms you're having that are lowering the quality of your life that your doctor has no idea could be related to your diet. All those things, if you're suffering from that, brain fog, anxiety, depression, low energy levels, first thing you want to do is cut out every single plant food, or at least drastically minimize it from your diet. And if you are going to include plant foods, the first thing that I would cut out would be the veggies. Like that's probably the number one most, So, so plants, we tend to think of them as harmless, beautiful things around us that give us bright colors, and we love them, and we don't realize that they are also a living organism, just like every other living organism on the planet, that actually has a built-in self-defense mechanism. If plants did not have a self-defense mechanism, they would not have evolved and survived for millions of years alongside so many other insects and animals who are trying to eat it, right? So they've had to devise some strategy to give them a survival edge over the competition. And because they cannot move like animals can run away from you or they can attack you, right? They don't have the luxury of mobility. And so plants have had to come up with another strategy, I would argue, that is far more lethal and far more problematic for animals. And that is the chemical toxins that they create. They are master chemists, to quote Dr. Stephen Gundry, even though Dr. Gundry knows that he still is eating his plants. I cannot get
mind-blowing. Mind-blowing.
I know, it's like you helped so many people become carnivores, but you're still eating the plant foods. Like even if you pressure cook the food, I've done even YouTube videos on that. I mean, there are studies that have been published. They get the food, they put it through a pressure cooker and different modes of cooking, and they see how many anti-nutrients are left. And they still have anti-nutrients. You cannot ever 100% eliminate plant toxins. They will always be there. You might drastically minimize them, but why eat them at all? There's no nutrition that's found in plants that you cannot find in animal foods in a better form and in much higher amounts. So plants are master chemists, and they create toxins in them as their form of defense, like guided missiles that will, once you ingest, they're gonna go and attack various different components in your body. It depends on what plants you're eating, what toxin it has in it. It's gonna affect whatever relevant physiological function. Like for example, the aquaporins can affect the water channels in your cells. That's one example. Another example are lectins, which is another one that Dr. Stephen Gundry talks a lot about. Lectins are found in grains and beans in very high amounts, but they're found in far more plant foods. And they have been shown to literally travel via the vagus nerve, which is the nerve, like a highway that connects your digestive system and your brain. They have been shown to be present in the vagus nerve. Like there's a study, I never filmed a YouTube video on that, but I have to, because it's such an important study. You can literally see that lectin inside the vagus nerve trying to travel up, and eventually it reaches the dopamine producing cells in your brain and literally destroys them. And yeah, Dr. Paul Mason.
Yep.
Did I say that right? Yes.
Yep.
I haven't watched a presentation of his recently, but I urge everybody to check out all his talks. He's got a wealth of information. He talks about that study in one of his presentations. I think he has one only on lectins. So if you can find the talk that he's given on lectins, he talks about that study, and he shows you the picture of that lectin traveling in the vagus nerve. And he's talking about how lectins can lead to Alzheimer's disease because, and Parkinson's, because Parkinson's is particularly characterized by the destruction of dopamine producing cells in the brain. And so if you're eating lectins and they're traveling via your gut, reaching the dopamine cells and destroying them, what do you think is going to happen if you have that genetic tendency and it runs in your family? What do you think is going to happen when you're 60 or 70 or 80?
Yeah, that's right. Those are all going to build up, and you're going to have, I would assume, a lot of dementia-related issues.
Oh, everything, yeah, exactly. Parkinson's is especially with especially characterized by dopamine cells that are being destroyed. With dementia, you also have some of that happening. With Alzheimer's, you also have some of that happening. Alzheimer's disease is now termed type 3 diabetes. Yeah. Where do you get diabetes from? Mainly when you're eating carbs. Where are carbs found? In plants? Do we have any carbohydrates in animal foods? No, except if you're doing milk, which I wouldn't recommend anyway.
Right. Yeah. No, that's a wonderful explanation. What are some of the other smaller toxins that maybe are not talked about as much? We talk about lectins and oxalates and those kinds of things. What other things have you found? You mentioned fruit in particular, and I can't remember the chemical you mentioned there.
Salicylates is another one. They're found not only in fruit, but various other plant foods as well. But the reason why it's important for people to know is because there is a subgroup of influencers that, and just not just the influencers, like there is a general idea in the carnivore world that, fruits are harmless and it's fine and it's just the fructose, but maybe the fructose isn't that great. No, it's not just that. It's also that they also have defense mechanisms in the form of salicylates. And we almost never talk about that. So you do have defense chemicals in fruits as well. Persin, I mentioned in avocados. I think it's also found in parsley, I believe. I'm not 100% sure. I'd have to check it out. Cashews has urushiol in it. And it's funny because I shared one time on my Instagram how you can never eat raw cashews. And my friend, we went to school together, she texted me, she's like, I eat cashews all the time and I eat them raw. I'm like, you're not eating them raw, honey, it's steamed, because they have to steam them to remove the urushiol first before you can eat them. So you think you're eating raw cashews, but they have been already pre-treated. Olives, you can't walk around and pick an olive off of a tree. You can't have that. It's got toxins in it that have to be also removed before you can have olives, whether it's green or black. So pretty much every plant that you can think of has to be treated in some way. Broccoli and cauliflower, all of those, they come from the toxic mustard seed oil. So mustard seed, or the mustard plant, has a toxin in it, and it's found in the mustard oil. That's why it is illegal for us in the United States to sell mustard oil, because it's so toxic. Well, what you don't realize is that it's found in very small amounts, but still found in broccoli, in cauliflower, in cabbage, bok choy, Brussels sprouts. Those are all derivatives of the mustard plant. Those are all different hybrids of the mustard plant. That's where they come from. So you're consuming that on a regular basis. And if you're having broccoli sprouts, that's way higher. It's the amount of erucic acid in that is way higher than if you are to have the actual broccoli florets. And the mustard and the broccoli seed, even higher. So you're eating that on a regular basis. You think the sprouts are good, you're eating that on a regular basis. Chronic low dose ends up to being probably far more detrimental to your health than having it in one big shot of like a really high dose toxin. So yeah, we have to increase awareness around this thing, because it's really frustrating for people who are trying to get healthier and they are given the wrong recipe. you know.
That's right.
And then they have to, and then they think that it's them, and they think that they have no willpower, they have no discipline, and it becomes their fault. And the longer you struggle with that, the more you have, the weaker your self-confidence and your ability to get healthier gets. And that's just an awful place to be.
Yeah,
So
I totally agree. I totally agree.
yeah.
And you mentioned the hybridization of those plants. A lot of people don't realize, like, broccoli has not been around in the way that you think it has for very long. Cauliflower, you know, Brussels sprouts, all those things you mentioned, they were bred, they were hybridized. They didn't exist in the way that you would see them in a store 1,000 years ago.
Yeah, so in the 1800s, Italian farmers would grow some broccoli, but it wasn't until the mid 1900s that Americans actually started to eat broccoli, because some Italian farmers came over and brought the seed with them and started growing broccoli here. But it wasn't that prevalent up until the 1950s. It was still not that prevalent, but around that time is when we started looking at broccoli as a normal part of dinner or lunch, and people started eating a lot more of that. So it's
crazy.
It is
so
insane.
Crazy.
It's insane. The more I learn about nutrition, it's like, obviously I'm so happy that I have all this knowledge now about it. But at the same time, it freaks me out, because it's like, how many other areas of my life am I completely ignorant in that I think I know what I'm talking about, but I'm not, you know. Because if people like us in the field for decades, having like the highest level of education, I mean, I have a bachelor's and a master's, like I said, a doctorate, a personal trainer. I've been teaching trainers and teaching nutritionists. I mean, if someone like me can take so long to understand what the optimal human diet is, what chance does the regular person have? Like,
no chance. No chance. No chance. No chance. Walk into any office building and just go to the break room and realize, like, wow, we're talking about like healthy, quote unquote, healthy fruits and vegetables that people can have. I'd way rather have somebody have a salad than have the processed crap in the middle of the store. But those things can still be problematic. And I'm so glad you went there with this kind of division I'm seeing in the carnivore world. And, you know, there's carnivores that have promoted the carnivore diet for a long time. They're now eating lots of fruit. You know, they're eating more plant foods. They're also including like a lot of honey, maybe a lot of dairy. And you already mentioned that's not something that you really recommend. And I get a little bummed out, because these people are influencers and they are influencing people who then get really, I would say, confused. They're not in the same state. So I'm just curious, like, your opinion on that kind of thing, and whether people can have that or not.
Yeah, that's another example of how much your personal experience can influence how you view a certain topic. So when you have not personally struggled with cravings and addiction and weight gain, you're not as afraid of certain food groups. So you're more likely to try and make the case that these foods might have a health benefit. If for you, they're helping you out. If for you, they're working for you. And that's the problem with generalizing. Sometimes it can like, we need to pay attention. While I don't say that it's got to be like this personalized nutrition for everybody, I do believe that the carnivore diet, a strict carnivore diet, is the optimal human diet. I do believe that. I also understand that we have new challenges in recent history, like overweight and food addiction, and things that our ancestors never had to deal with and never had to recover from, right, first, before going on the optimal human diet. So if you've never had an issue with addiction, you've never put on body fat, or you don't put on body fat easily, like you've probably always, you know, been at an ideal weight and you're doing great, and you can do some rice and you can do some honey and it's fine for you. Like, I can understand why you might realize that these aren't the worst things. Yeah, because they're not the worst things for you. Right? But for somebody whose body type doesn't do well with carbohydrates, especially at the beginning stages, if I'm working with somebody and I want them to drop body fat and to normalize their metabolism, I'm never going to give them those foods. I'm never going to be like, yeah, but it's healthy and it's fine. You can do, you know, the rice and honey. And And I don't think those influencers are even promoting honey for people who are obese. I'm sure that they are aware that there is a subset of people who can't do that. I think it's just important to really emphasize it, you know, always like, yes, honey might do well or might not cause problems and flare-ups of skin conditions or whatever, but you still want to be careful with it, you know? So I think it's personal experience that's guiding the philosophy. When you have not struggled in a certain area, you might not fully absorb just how much of an impact certain foods can have on certain people, you know?
Yeah.
I have a little bit of honey, I want to eat the whole jar.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
It's not gonna work.
I get the same. I was just over at my client's house and he has a very small strawberry plant that's growing.
Yeah.
And he was like, check out these strawberries. I'm like, wow, these look really good. And I don't have a problem with strawberries. I never eat them. These are growing out of the ground. They're like my thumb tip. They're like tiny, tiny, tiny. He said that his girlfriend is so allergic to strawberries that if they touch her mouth at all, she has a crazy reaction. So that right there tells you that most plant foods are going to be problematic for most people.
Yeah.
And I picked a few and I threw in my mouth and like, wow, this is really good. And I noticed 30 minutes later, I'm really, really hungry. I never get hungry that early in the morning. And I've noticed that with fruits. Like, yeah, I can have a natural fruit that's growing around here every now and again, which is very rare and a very special time of the year. But if I do it, I'm super hungry. So there's more to it than just like, you know, if somebody has already been, you know, low fat, high carbohydrate most of their lives, you really need to go that strict side, like you said, and eliminate all those things because you're just going to have more blood sugar issues.
100%, at least in the initial phase. I noticed that people who have a genetic tendency to put on body fat or to have, or if they have diabetes in their family, I think they never really, they might go back and be able to eat a little bit more carbs, but never really to the same level as before. Like they'll always have to be very, very low carb, ideally even zero carb. And it's even easier to be zero carb than to be low carb, because when it's zero carbs, you forget about the addiction, you forget about those things, you have zero cravings. When you keep just a tiny amount of carbohydrates, for some people that can be a trigger. And so now you're battling more cravings. It's like, why do it the hard way, you know?
Yeah. I agree with you. I think a lot of people are really surprised to hear that. And I always thought that people could moderate a little bit better, but I'm with you 100%. I think going all in and being more strict is a lot easier than trying to do it like 90% and include other things, because it's going to be confusing. You might have blood sugar issues like we talked about. You're going to get hungry. And, you know, when I'm 100% strict, there's no question. I walk into a store, I go right to where I need to go. You don't buy other things. They're not part of your diet. It's not food. It can be in a box, and just because you can put it in your mouth doesn't mean it's food.
Yes. Yeah. Anything that comes out of a package is not food. It's a science fair project. And like you said, it also opens up a whole part of your brain that's now free to explore life, you know, as opposed to constantly thinking every 2 to 3 hours, what of all the foods on the planet should I be eating next? Like all of those decisions, I mean, it takes up a lot of bandwidth that you could instead allocate to your goals and, you know, your career, your relationships. I mean, life, you live more, you produce more, you know?
It's so liberating. I'm so glad you went there with that point. I absolutely agree. Like, take that time and energy, go on a walk, get to know your surroundings. There's so many other enriching things that you can do with all that time and energy. I love that. I do want to say, maybe we should comment a little bit about why the animal foods are so safe. What do other animals have that we don't have, that they are able to take all those toxins and somehow be okay with them, that we aren't?
Yeah, I think it has to do with evolution. It's not like human beings will never ever adapt to plant foods. You give the human race enough hundreds of years and thousands of years and maybe millions of years, eventually they will adapt to plant foods. And the way we adapt is basically those who don't die off. They don't produce offspring, you know, that's the harsh reality of evolution. That's how we adapt.
That's
you
right.
know? So that's how it works. Our lineage, the environment we lived in was exposed to a very cold climate. So there was no plant foods, maybe once a month, barely. So because everything was frozen the vast majority of the year, we only had access to fatty animals, and that's what we went after. And so our genetics adapted and the human beings that reproduced and remained alive to reproduce were the ones who did best by eating animal foods. And that's why it is so suited for us. And this is why our DNA expects it from us. And we thrive under those conditions. So there's nothing inherently wrong about plants or even sugar. You give human beings enough time, they'll adapt to the sugar, you know? So probably like the models who do great, no matter how much sugar they eat, those are the ones who are gonna survive. They'll be like the last man standing and they'll have offspring and they'll be fine with sugar, you know? But is that the route we want to take? Wait until everybody else dies off until we adapt to a new reality? Or is it much smarter to completely revamp our food environment and realize that's just going to take forever for us to adapt to those foods? And let's just go back to what we've already had time to adapt to, which is fatty animals, fat and protein.
That's right. And those animals did evolve also eating plants, and they developed ways to get rid of some of those toxins. And a lot of people don't realize this, but even a cow that's eating lots of grass, the cow has certain stomachs and different ways to ferment that out. The cow is still running on fat. It's still running on protein. It just has a different conversion process. Even though it's eating, high cellulose and a lot of grass, it's not running on carbohydrate. It actually knows how to convert it over to fat and run on the fat.
There you go. Perfect answer. Yes.
So interesting. So I would love to be a fly on the wall in some of your nutrition classes. So you are teaching nutrition, right?
Oh yeah.
What is that like?
Oh my gosh, it's a lot of fun. And students, and it's so great because they are like a sponge, and I'm so glad that they took my course, because that's like 1 in a million chance to have an instructor who has gone through the whole process and finally understands the carnivore diet. Because 99% of the time they're just going to get an instructor who's only following only what the textbook says and telling them that you need to eat 6 slices of bread or 6 ounces of grain every day and 3 cups of milk every day, but I mean, I do have to give them the basics. Obviously, we do have like a program that we need to follow. So they do have like the basic science, but of course they also understand why the basic stuff that is written in those textbooks are also wrong. Like, for example, our major energy source is glucose. Like, I'll give them what they need to know, because a lot of my students end up becoming nurses. They go through the nursing track. Like, probably, I don't know, maybe 60% of my students at Miami-Dade College are going to become nurses. So they are going to eventually end up in a hospital system. They do need to understand the mainstream idea, to be able to work with everybody else. But at the same time, I give them everything else. So I've recorded the basic lectures. They go over them in the weekends. And then when we meet, we get all this time together just to discuss. And so I get to tell them everything else and tell them, like, no, your brain and body actually prefers fat, prefers ketones. It can run on glucose, and it really tries hard to eliminate glucose the moment you give it to it. But it's like a defensive mechanism, because keeping that glucose in your blood for too long and for too high of a level is actually going to damage your blood vessels, going to damage every other tissue, your collagen, your cells, your mitochondria, everything gets damaged by glucose. And so it's not that glucose is the preferred energy source. It's just that your body's freaking out every time you give it carbs and sugars. And that's why it's trying to clear that glucose first and foremost, but it prefers the fat. So yeah, we talk about that, and they're always in awe. It's like, wow, and we talk about the politics, how Amy Klobuchar, the senator, was lobbying to consider pizza as a vegetable because it contains tomato sauce. Yes, she ran for president as a Democrat. And by the way, I'm neither Democrat nor Republican. Like, this has nothing to do with politics. It just goes to show you how you have people on both ends of the political spectrum that are equally commissioned by the food industry to do their bidding. So yeah, and that you can actually see that if everybody goes and watches Fed Up documentary. It came out in 2014.
So good.
Yes,
so
it's
good.
great. I make sure my students watch it every semester. Talks a lot about sugar addiction and just how addictive that is. And they show her basically, reading the prepared thing that she has to oppose the passing the bill, and to kind of making sure pizza remains in the school lunch program, remains on the menu, because it's so nutritious. It's a vegetable.
So bad.
Oh my God. Wow.
You can't make this up.
That's what I could never yeah. It's like who would ever want to become a politician if those are the kinds of stuff that you would need to do to be successful in what you're in politics? Who would ever want to become a isn't that like the lowest level that you can stoop to? I mean, it doesn't get worse. Do you know how much money I leave on the table, Casey, from all the companies that reach out to me to work with me to promote their products? But I'm like, I don't eat that stuff. I don't believe in that. I go out of my way to tell everybody how terrible those foods are. How could I ever accept money from you and promote that? Like, the sheer amount of money that I leave on the table because I will not work with brands I'm not 100% convinced of, and yet you have people like her that just literally will go live and say that pizza is a vegetable.
Right. Yeah, no, that's such a good point. I don't know. I wouldn't feel good about myself. Clearly, you wouldn't either by doing that. I know somebody in my area who I believe they were a dentist, something in the dental industry, and they opened up a franchise of a soda shop that's selling these oversized sodas with extra sugaring and sugar cookies. And I had a tough time with that. I'm like, yeah, it's a business and you're an entrepreneur and you want to start businesses and things, but doesn't that hurt your soul? Don't you have some kind of like cognitive dissonance with that? Like, how can you believe one thing and then try to sell another product? I don't like that. I don't dig
that. That's so foreign to me, that like my mindset, the way that I think, like for me, I have to truly believe in something. That's where I derive my energy from, that's how I'm inspired to get after it. But yeah, there are a lot of people who can divorce themselves between their money-making job and what they actually believe.
Yeah,
and I don't get that. That's not.
I don't either. There's not a dollar amount that would make me happy. There's not a car or a big house or whatever that would make me happy by doing that. So exactly. I'm really glad that you take that stand, and that's so important to acknowledge, and good for you. What you mentioning energy, that's your life force. That's you showing up in the world and making a contribution in your own little way. And what is worth trading that for? Like that's everything. That's your entire life. So yeah, anyway, I love that you do that. How are you presenting information to your students? Because again, you're going through the biochemistry. Is it fun for you to like be able to say like something that gets them thinking along a different lines? Like, this is what this book says, but check out this study that was done that says this, that, and the other.
Yeah. Cool. All we do. Yeah. And then they're so mind blown because it's so the opposite of what they probably came into this class thinking, and like, for example, they're asking me about recipes. I'm like, just eat meat. The less ingredients, the healthier. Once you delve into this whole recipe creation process, the more you're adding stuff you have no business eating, So they're always in awe. And the good thing is that for them, it's much easier to understand it and absorb it because they haven't been force-fed the wrong information like you and I have, I mean, imagine us going through class after class after class, all of the content we consumed, pushing just one narrative. You can always do that with anything, right? You can cherry pick with anything and create a narrative. But that entered our brains, that changed the neural pathways in our brains. So it was harder for us eventually to be like, wow, my whole life has been a lie. That's hard. That's a hard pill to swallow. Yep. So I envy my students in a way. It's like, I wish I had somebody who like me, who taught me when I was 18. My life would have gone in a completely different direction.
Totally different.
Probably done completely something else because I would have been healthier at a much younger age,
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. If nothing else, these kids are getting the opportunity to learn how to question things and learn how to critically think rather than go through this book. Here are the facts. don't question anything. This is what you do, versus
Yeah.
you're bringing a different side of things, and they can ask questions and investigate things. And, and again, something you brought up earlier, I think is so important. We live in 2022. You have podcasts and YouTube and all kinds of content out there, even on Instagram and Facebook, and you can learn the truth. It might take you a little bit of time, but it's not monopolized by these universities the way that it used to be.
Exactly. Thankfully, you know, and that's why a lot of people like that are in the system, you know, they look at YouTubers and be like, oh, you're just a YouTuber, you know, or, you know, something from a YouTube video is not taken as seriously. For me, like when I hear somebody is working in the system, the first thing I'm thinking about, for them to be able to work in the system, they have to have such a herd mentality for the vast majority of the time. Like, I think twice before I take whatever they are telling me, because I always am remembering their day-to-day is going to a job, you know, and they have a lot of limitations on their freedom, what they're allowed to pursue or not. And
That's
so what they say, I don't take it at face value, you know. For me,
that's such a good point.
Completely flipped perception.
I love that. And that's a great segue to my last few questions. And the first is going to be, have you noticed any of your students get either really discouraged or kind of quit what they were doing because they're learning that what the textbook says is not necessarily the truth and might not be what they can tell people in the future? Or do they get more excited about it over time?
I don't think, I mean, I've had students write me letters like they want to become now dietitians, but what they don't realize is that even with that, that's probably going to be harder for them, because after you take my course, it's going to be hard to integrate in society. I give them that warning always at the beginning. It's like, be careful, because imagine knowing everything you know by the end of taking my course, you know more about nutrition after my course than what your own physician knows about nutrition. And then you go and you have to, if you're a nurse, let's say, because a lot of my students end up becoming nurses, you go and you work in a hospital system. I mean, they're horrified on a daily basis. It's like, how can you give this person who clearly has diabetes, how are you giving them applesauce? How are you giving them carbs? And then you inject them with the insulin. It's like you give them the poison and then you give them a drug to handle the poison. And then now you have side effects. Wow, you know. So I think a lot of my students still don't understand that taking my course is a double-edged sword, because they're so happy by the end of it, but then once they enter real life, they're like, oh my god. You have to become independent afterwards. The only way to function healthfully after taking my course and knowing all this information is that you would have to open up your own clinic. You would have to do something independent. Otherwise, it can be soul crushing, really. And that's why I'm unemployable. That's why I do what I do, YouTube.
Well, and that was the second part of the question I was going to ask you, is like, you had a turning point in your career where you're coming up in school, you're learning some of this stuff, and you could have said like, wow, the medical industry is not where I want to be. I want to bail out of this. I want to go do something else. But you stuck with it to be able to become a doctor and have that title, which I have so much respect for, because then you have more influence and you can go to a platform that more people are going to see and have more of an impact that way. I think that's such a cool way to approach it.
Thank you. But it was hard, because like in the last 2 to 3 years, as I was finishing up my dissertation, that's when I knew for a fact that I could not be employed and work in a research lab or be a professor, you know, like an employee. I couldn't do it. And it was very hard to continuously show up and work on the dissertation part is the most emotionally taxing, because there's so much time waiting in between. It's not so much the work, it's about waiting for your advisor to come back from her month-long vacation, you know, to be able to schedule a time to see her. And I did not have a good, you know, relationship. And there was nothing encouraging or inspiring about the way that she helped me, you know, like zero inspiration there, unfortunately. And so it was very, like, I felt very lonely and alone during that period of time. And I couldn't start something else, even though now I know I could have, but I guess I wasn't as equipped or mentally tough back then to do something else, because there was always the idea that, okay, once we get the approval, now we're going to have to collect the data. Now I'm going to have to not do anything else but that, you know. It was always, I always felt like it was right around the corner that I'm going to be collecting the data, write it up and finish, you know. So that really took a lot of emotional toll on me, plus the fact that I felt so out of place that, you know, I knew that this is meaningless work. Like, yeah, I'm understanding the science and how to do the research and everything, but the whole ambiance on academic campuses is not flexible enough for somebody like me, you know. I need all the freedoms, not like too much, like all of them, you know. So, you know, it was difficult, but yeah, I have to admit that I just stuck with it because I was like, you know, I'm so close to getting my doctorate, might as well. But I did think a lot about quitting, like, I'm not even gonna lie. It was the first time after leaving Lebanon, because I grew up in Lebanon and I also struggled with depression around that time. It was the first time after leaving Lebanon that I wouldn't say suicidal, but very, like, I just felt like, what's the point? You know, I got to a very low point, you know, during that time. It was hard, but, you know, stuck with it.
I'm so glad that you did. And it's like you said, like, if you would have stuck with a university or you would have stuck in the medical system, your amount of impact would probably have been very limited. If you could have said anything, you may have gotten in trouble for it. So taking the route that you took, but then making it so accessible for people through YouTube, I think is fantastic. I think that's a wonderful way of doing things, and I really have a lot of respect for that.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I was already stirring up trouble. I was working at UM while I was still finishing up my dissertation. I took like a research job at UM, and we would, like, on breaks we would go together, our research team, and there was this medical doctor who would come with us. And she had no idea, like, what are the different subtypes of LDL, and like she was constantly making jokes, you know, about, like, yeah, butter is good, and like laughing about an old ad that butter is good. And I'm like, and one time there were literally like 6 doctors, 6 of us, in the middle of this restaurant at UM where everybody goes to, and I was in the mood, and I was like, oh yeah, why is butter bad? Like, let's see. And, you know, I did make a scene, but not on purpose. I was asking her, like, if you think that you're trying to make those like passive aggressive comments knowing that I'm carnivore and keto, let's see if you can back that up. It was the most humiliating thing for her, because she didn't even know that there were subfractions of LDL. And then I was like, no, it's okay. I understand why you don't know this stuff. They don't teach you this stuff. And
That's
you know, and you know how medical doctors think that they're above a PhD. So yeah, like I already started stirring up trouble. So clearly I don't do well in those situations. Not good.
Not good. That's awesome.
Yeah, thank God for YouTube.
That's great. Well, we absolutely need people like you in the world to stir things up a little bit and have people question, like all you were doing was bringing up questions. And I think if more people just consider it again, like we talked about in the beginning of this conversation, that you don't get to the carnivore space without learning an incredible amount about nutrition and facing that uphill battle we talked about. So your amount of knowledge is vast. I really appreciate this conversation. It was very entertaining and very educational. Where can people go to find you and connect with you and your work?
Thank you so much, Casey. So I'm all over the internet. So you can just find my YouTube channel. It's Dr. Sarah with an H Zaldivar. Instagram, it's at dr.sarah with an H Zaldivar. And those are the 2 areas where I would say I'm most active, Instagram and YouTube, but I also have Pinterest, which I have neglected for far too long. I have Twitter, you know, TikTok, I've also neglected, you know, Facebook, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I think YouTube and Instagram, very easy to find me. And
Excellent.
I'm sure you'll link them below, so it's easy.
Yeah, absolutely. We will link them. More people need to find your stuff. Dr. Sarah Zaldivar, thank you so very much for this awesome conversation. Thank you for everything that you've learned. Thank you for teaching us about aquaporins, which I didn't know about, and neither did Sarah Kleiner. And so we're all educated by you today, which I really appreciate. Thank you so very much. And thank you for taking time to be on our show today. We really appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Casey. And thank you for everybody for sticking with us till the end. And I hope this was helpful.
Absolutely. I'm sure it will be very, very helpful. And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio.